Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at Nuke's basic geometry in Nuke's 3D system, and all the 3D material and geometry you would need are located under the 3D menu in the menu bar, and you could find them under geometry, and you have things such as card, cube, sphere, cylinder, and some modifiers as well. So to have a quick look, what we could do is we could create a simple sphere, and we could just simply type sphere or grab it from the geometry menu that we were looking at earlier. And if we look at this in 3D space now, you have yourself a sphere in 3D space. There's other modifiers available too that you could use in Nuke's 3D system, such as a edit geo. So if we put this down and we grab edit geo, this allows us to modify this geometry by selecting vertices or faces. So for example, if we view the edit geo and up in our viewer, if we go to the geometry selection mode, we could go to vertex and we could start to grab vertices, and we could, using the edit geo, modify this geometry by pulling parts out like so. And similarly, you could do the same thing with selecting faces. So we could do faces and we could grab a cluster of faces and we could modify this geometry using faces as well. So that's pretty handy to be able to do some slight modification so it's not the geometry that you started out with. So Edit Geo is very handy. On top of that too, there is another node. Let me go back to normal object selection. Another modifier called Displace Geo. So if we grab that, and what the Displace Geo does is it takes a displacement item. So we could plug in a noise pattern, for example. And if I just grab simply a noise pattern, and this is what this noise pattern looks like. And in 3D space, if I plug that noise pattern into our displacement, you could see we've got some displacement on this geometry. And if I pop this out, by adjusting the scale in the displacement, we could push displacement more heavily on this geometry. And similarly too, we could adjust the size of the noise pattern itself too, and that can modify the shape of the displacement too. So we could have something that looks like a meteor or something else like some rough terrain. So my main purpose of demonstrating the Displace Geo is just to show you that you could displace and create something a little bit more complex than what we originally started out with, which was this sphere. So this Displace Geo is a handy tool to use if you were going to create, say, debris pieces to use in a particle system and things like that. So that's generally it with the basic geometry in Nuke. We could also grab a cube and we could create a ground plane, for example. So if we look at this cube, we could create a ground plane. Let me get rid of this sphere from the back. So what we could do is scale this down in Y, and we could also globally scale this up. And I'll thin this out again a little bit more. Something like that as a ground plane. And we could also combine these together. So what you would use to combine geometry in Nuke's 3D system would be a scene node. So we could grab a scene node and plug these in together. And there's no limit to how many items you could plug into a scene node. So you could plug a camera in if you wanted to, or other geometry pieces in here. But that's one way to combine geometry together. Another one is another item called Merge Geo. And this is similar to the scene node where you could plug in two pieces of geometry, and similarly it creates multiple inputs. So we could combine geometry this way too. So you could use a scene node or a Merge Geo to combine them. And now that we've got this scene node together, I could reposition this sphere just so it's sitting above this ground plane. Something like that. And what we could do too is create a camera, and we could plug this camera into our scene as well. And now we could position our camera to be looking at this scene. So let's just pop this out, and we could shift this camera in Z. And let's look through that camera. So we could go to our camera selection. We'll go camera 6, and I will lock that. And let's lower the camera a little bit. And I'm going to just rotate it a tad bit as well, just so we have an interesting angle on this. And let's lower it some more. So there we have it. That's just the basic introduction to the basic geometry in Nuke, in addition to some of the modifiers. In the coming videos, we will look at applying shaders to these materials and rendering it out of the 3D space so we can look at it in 2D space.